We are going to talk about the Postal Service. This is something that David and I are both extremely passionate about.
Very passionate, yep.
Because the Postal Service represents the best that you can, just almost the best possible example of a public institution.
It's Americana at its basic. Is there anything more American than the Postal Service?
Right. You can't think of very many things, that's for sure. So we'll kind of back up just a little bit and give a little bit of background and set the stage for what's happening now. Privatization has been a conservative wet dream for the Postal Service for decades. They have tried to sabotage it whenever possible to manufacture a crisis so that they can use that crisis to argue for privatization. So what do I mean they've tried to sabotage the Postal Service? One of the biggest examples of this is that in 2006, a law was passed that required the creation of a trust fund that fully funds post-retirement health care costs for 75 years. Almost a century. That means that the Postal Service is obligated by law to have in a trust fund already funds to cover the healthcare costs for retirees who don't even work for the Postal Service yet. Some of these funds are going to go towards the post-retirement healthcare costs of people that do not even work at the Postal Service right now. And no other federal agency, no other corporation is made to do this. Yep. If this were lifted, the Postal Service would be reporting profits annually. And this accounts, aside from the current crisis, obviously, because they're in deep trouble, which we'll get to, this accounts for 90% of the debt that the Postal Service has incurred since the creation of that law. It's ludicrous. It's completely ludicrous that they're putting these kinds of obligations on the Postal Service, and no other federal agency, no other corporation. It's just not done. It's not done because there's no reason to do it. It does not make fiscal sense.
Yeah. Why don't we start and a lot of my workers that I represent are in defense, but can you imagine having to fund the defense budget for 75 years in advance, $75 trillion? Otherwise, right, we would farm it out. Who are we going to farm it out to? Privatize it, what have you. But yeah, it's crazy. 75 years.
Right. Well, imagine now me being 23 years old, being forced by the government to have in my savings account right now that I can't touch until I retire enough money to fund all of my post-retirement health care. It's absurd. It is absurd. And the Postal Service is doing it. And they're running in the red most years, but they're doing it, and they're running a basically successful operation, even with this huge weight.
With that. Yep.
Even with that. So, if they were able to operate like any other organization or any other agency,
any other private business.
Right. Like I said, they would be running a profit almost every year.
Yep.
And so, the question that everybody asks when I tell them this, because most people aren't aware of that law, most people aren't aware that the Postal Service has fiscal obligations that no other organization in the country has. Why? Why do they do that? They assume that there must be some legitimate reason that Congress passed that law. Otherwise, why would they pass it? And the reason is it's pure ideology. The conservative movement, the center of that is that the private sector is good and the public sector is bad. And government is inefficient. The private sector is efficient. The public sector drains funds. The public sector drains resources. The public sector is bad and the private sector is good. That's the fundamental, the gist of it.
Although we're bailing out the private sector and not bailing out the Postal Service consistently.
Right. And the Postal Service just completely disproves that. It's efficient, it's reliable, it's cheap. You can send a letter across the country from Florida to Alaska for 50 cents, and no one is being made obscenely wealthy by the Postal Service. No one's a billionaire from being the top man at the Postal Service, but no one is working poor either. It's just the working antithesis of everything that the conservative free market capitalist worldview says is true. It proves it wrong. It proves it wrong, so they have to sabotage it to try to make it true, what they think is true. That's what it comes down to.
Yep.
So the situation now is that the Postal Service is facing huge revenue shortfalls, like every other organization, like every other business, like every other federal agency. And they've requested a grant, like many businesses and federal agencies have received. For example, the airlines received $30 billion in grants. That's just cash money that the airlines received free and clear, and then they received another 20 or 30 billion in loans.
Yeah. They got in on the CARES Act, and I'm gonna say something right here because I am super pissed about this fact, because I just learned, I learned last night, a machinist brother, said that it, and I'm gonna call the airline out. United Airlines, they got in on the stimulus package and or the relief package, and part of that package was to protect workers' wages and keep those guys on the payroll throughout this pandemic. That was stipulated. That was part of taking the money. And then I learned last night that, they're going to keep them on the payroll, but what they're going to do is cut all their hours down to 22 hours a week. So yeah, and the bad thing is you're stuck, because you're gonna get your 22 hours a week. You can't quit because you won't get unemployment.
Right.
It flies in the face of the entire intent of that package. It makes me sick. There's a lot of workers over the next several months and year that's going to be just dying on the vine. They can't go to work anywhere else because they're hoping that they're going to get back up to their 40 hours. I mean, who can live on 22 hours? There's not a person out there working full time that can support their family on 22 hours. But yet this is what they're doing to them.
Yeah, it's absurd. And like you said, they received free and clear tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And so here's what the Postal Service requested. The Postal Service requested through the rest of the fiscal year a $13 billion grant, okay, out of a enormous $2 trillion bill that was passed. The Postal Service was like, we just need $13 billion. That's all we need, and we will be financially stable for the rest of the fiscal year. And they wanted that put in the CARES Act, and the Trump administration threatened a veto. They said they would kill the whole package just so they don't have to help the Postal Service. It's absurd. It's absurd. It is a fundamentally American service, a public good that is being provided efficiently, cheaply, and is providing good paying union jobs to workers all across the country. And they don't want that to be the case. They don't, they fundamentally, they hate to see public institutions working for working people. They hate to see things working for working people. If it's not making somebody filthy rich and somebody else dirt poor, they don't want to see it.
And all the libertarians out there that want to complain about government services, I can tell you this: when you go from paying 52 cents a letter to mail, if you still use checks, what have you, to paying $13, because go down to FedEx and see what they charge you to mail a letter. $13. It's insane, the difference in price. So
right.
All the libertarians that think, well, we shouldn't have any more government programs than possible, I'm telling you, this is a great government program. It's as simple as that.
And it does not require taxpayer funding. That's something that a lot of people don't realize, is that the Postal Service is completely self-sustaining. Like all these other businesses, they're asking for an influx of cash during this crisis, but all the other years, they're self-sustaining. They're not requiring tax money. They are completely, they completely sustain themselves on postage. And
hey, Jacob, we got a question just came through. It said, I won't say the name, but I'll just say, just tuning in, but why does the Postal Service need to be bailed out? We are shipping stuff left and right, and they should be super busy. Thanks, guys.
The Postal Service needs to be bailed out because they have faced a severe revenue shortfall. Like many other businesses, they're facing revenue shortfalls, and the question is, why are they facing revenue shortfalls? And that's because people are mailing less things. A big portion of their revenue comes from like advertising that companies mail out, and companies don't have money to advertise right now, so they're not sending those ads.
Yeah, a lot of the companies aren't in business right now. They simply aren't doing anything right now.
Right. Yeah. So
other than essential workers, you've got a lot of your non-essential workers that generally use the post office because they were reasonable rates compared to UPS or FedEx or DHL. That I'd have to do some research to give you the exact numbers, but I'm certain that the Postal Service usage is probably down 25% just because of all of the non-essential businesses that's been out of work for the last month. So they're in a bind just like everybody else is.
Right, and like I said, a big reason is because folks advertise through the mail, and those businesses just don't have the revenue to do that kind of thing right now. It's just there's been a huge decline in mail volume. So that's the reason for it. And I'm not saying we're definitely not necessarily saying that it's good that the other things have been bailed out. I would have liked to see public ownership of the airlines for such a large grant. I think all of the airlines combined are worth $50 billion. Like all of their stocks and everything are worth $50 billion, and we just gave them $30 billion. I would have liked to seen substantial government ownership in those businesses. But that being what it is, the Postal Service obviously should have been given the grant that they requested. But what they were given was a loan for $10 billion, and presumably they're gonna have to pay that back at some point unless somebody forgives it, and that's gonna put the Postal Service in a really big bind.
Let me clarify real quick, because you said something that is kind of a sticking point with me. I hate it when people say that because I don't believe in government ownership. We should be taxpayer ownership. The government owns shit.
Right.
At the end of the day, the government owns nothing. We are the ones that own everything. We're the ones that own the Postal Service. Mm-hmm. We own the government, even though they don't like to admit that. So, to me, when you said the government ownership of the airlines, I would like to see the airlines functioning just like the Metro in Atlanta or in Detroit or anywhere else, to where it's a nonprofit and the taxpayers own it, and they provide a service to the taxpayers. They're not making a killing off of us.
Right. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's that's good. But so I would recommend mailing your representative a letter in support of the grant money for the Postal Service. That doesn't preclude you from sending an email to them, but actually sending it through the mail would kind of be a good show of solidarity for the Postal Service. I know that I'm definitely going to be doing that. I think it's important. I mean, the Postal Service is just such a good. Just such a good institution.
It's in the Constitution.
Yeah, it's in the Constitution.
It's in the freaking Constitution. Yeah. I mean, come on. You want to protect your guns? Protect the damn Postal Service.
Yeah.
Good Lord, man.
Yeah. We can't let it be destroyed, and letting it be privatized would be the equivalent of letting it be destroyed.
You just watched a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We're in North Alabama talking about the news for workers by workers. We're going to be on the radio on 92.5 FM, 770 AM in the Huntsville, Decatur, Athens listening area on Saturdays from 9:30 to 11 AM beginning in May. We believe that this is a really good opportunity to put new ideas in front of a conservative talk show audience. This is an audience that has never so much as heard the word union in a positive light. But we need help raising the funds to purchase the airtime. So if you could afford to send us a few bucks, you can do that by going to patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. If you can't afford to do that, that's fine too. There are a lot of people going through some really rough times right now. So if you could just share our videos, that would be really helpful. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you.